Hey friends, this is Joseph Maynor. So this is my last night here in Vegas at the Flamingo. And what I want to do is I want to talk about the correspondence theory of truth line rejected. Because I made a video, it was called Philosophy 1, the correspondence theory of truth line accepted. And this video is going to be the second video to that, the correspondence theory of truth line rejected. You can see how both of these are a kind of a position too, right? This is right? You don't win by being indirect. Like being indirect is being direct. And it has its own issues. So we can see this as a kind of feminine operating in the masculine domain to try to build the link in where the node is out of control. The go get your man is out of control, right? But then this also becomes another man-splain, right? Another hierarchical position that then gets to dominate everything underneath it, like stage green operating on stage orange, but like at higher octaves as you go up the spiral. So there are many ways that the feminine can pull the rug out from underneath the node or the individual. There are many ways in which the masculine can pull the rug out from underneath the link or the relation. And this is an ongoing struggle or chaos that's also always here. It's the interaction between yin and yang, or the feminine and the masculine. And so I think this is the higher understanding, or a way to organize the theory. And it provides for a lot of the benefits of shadow work, but also of Zen. And I think yin and yang as Chinese philosophy ultimately fits Zen and what I call stage mauve. So this is a very high, state on the path. This is not some minor thing, but it's like, when I was learning algebra, I was reading calculus, but I wasn't even reading calculus books. I was just looking through them, because I wanted to see what was ahead. Like what was ahead was motivating to me, right? And so even if you're not at, from my perspective, what I consider to be the highest, perspectives that I'm able to talk about, that doesn't mean that that's still not useful to you. That's for you to decide. Depends on what you resonate with, right? So on some level, it does come down to aesthetics. Depends on what you resonate with. People think that aesthetics is the furthest away from truth, but it could very well be that aesthetics is the closest to truth of all the philosophical subjects. Closer to truth than metaphysics, closer to truth than epistemology, closer to truth than ethics, closer to truth than politics. It could very well be that aesthetics is really governing truth. And I would argue power, right, ultimately as well, survival. But then there's a transcendent aspect to us as well, where we see, I'm not a ruthless son of a gun. This is where morality comes into it. You can interview every person on this planet. Nobody would really want to think of themselves as a ruthless son of a gun. We all have a conscience. And we express that in our own way. But then we violate in ways that other people disagree with. And there's this war about, is there this one right morality or one right truth or one right politics or one right aesthetics, and then that quest for stability actually causes war, because it feeds into this faction thing where I'm right, you're wrong, you're right, I'm wrong. right? Um, I think, when you start hitting stage turquoise in spiral dynamics, you have to come to a kind of Spinozian conclusion that everything that's here is okay to be here. Like, if you're not willing to even, like, do this, I mean, intellectually you would do it at yellow, but, like, from an embodiment standpoint, you would do it at turquoise. I don't think you're tier 2 at all, actually. Like, you have to, like, get to the point where you're so reality focused that, and so loving on some level, that you're willing to just accept the way reality is as being good, for your own sake and for the sake of the people who you relate with too. This is not short-term thinking at all. This requires development. It's masculine because it's a stance. That's what makes the divine masculine, is that it's a stance, right? You take a stand. There's a side of you that wants to take a stand, and there's a side of you that wants to surrender. So you got to get those right, depending on what your personality is like. For some people, for everybody, that's going to be different. I mean, to assume everybody is going to be like me is ridiculous. I don't do that. I'm not the kind of person who wants to teach other people, you need to be like me, and I'm correct, and you're some kind of lower down. To me, that's like childish. And I think that's exactly what the correspondence theory of truth declined line accomplishes in philosophy. In a way, it's both liberating the child and also declaring the adult the child. It's about seeing through the power structures of philosophy, but also realizing too that nobody's immune from these power structures either. So, is it about being this like humble guru who's pretending like he's totally at peace? Or is it about being this like Hitler, right, who's like out there trying to tell everybody that they're right and everybody else is wrong? Well, see, as Jung would say, these are like archetypes, man. I mean, not even maybe like complexes even. Structures. Derrida, who I think was heavily influenced by depth psychology, would say that these are attempts to stabilize meaning that ultimately cannot be stabilized in this way by its very nature. Somebody like Nietzsche would say, well, I'm not even going to get that philosophical. It's just that the will to be trumps all of this carry-on baggage of meaning and intellectual order. That really it's play that wears the pants over living a good life, which ultimately is what philosophy is about. For Derrida, it was more about assuming that meaning was something that we need to dive into. But ultimately, it's this issue between order and chaos. So the masculine wants intellectual order and wants to believe that every statement on some level can be determined to be true or false about reality. The feminine is much more social, doesn't want to carve things out in an individual way, wants to look at the relation or the context in things and realize that time and space creates different circumstances. And so this need of the masculine to like find this kernel of underlying truth is exactly what the feminine is going to destabilize by its very nature. And you have to be able to allow both of these systems to be here if you want to try to understand which is the masculine, because intellect is masculine. The desire to understand being is masculine. It's the masculine mind. So, philosophy isn't entirely masculine mind. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a break. I'm a third of the way through the video. I'm already ahead of myself a little bit. This is good. We'll do the final 2/3. What I want to do in the second part of this video is give you guys a rich introduction of philosophy here, what I take to be the issues, and then we'll go from there. Just give me 1 second. All right, friends. So let me give you the preface that the masculine is never going to want to give. I'm a dude who's sitting in the Flamingo right now in Las Vegas, who's making a video on philosophy, who is giving you a narrative or a presentation of, through language and gestures and visuals, on the topic of philosophy, specifically regarding the correspondence theory of truth, line rejected. So notice there's already a framing here. There's a bias here. There's a context here. There's a person here who's making this video. Why am I making this video? Do you know why I'm making this video? Do I know why I'm making this video? So the feminine is able to appreciate and out a lot of the hidden picture than the masculine, that usually is in the masculine shadow. Because the masculine wants to pierce reality to find the one underlying concept or principle. The feminine tends to want to laugh at that. I mean, look at Nietzsche, right? Nietzsche laughs at the Apollonians. I don't know how to pronounce that. Apollonians versus Dionysus. So Apollo versus Dionysus. So Apollo is the god of intellectual order and cleanliness and logic and a relation between concept and truth, or between language and truth. It's the masculine's ideal to find clarity through the intellect. Whereas Dionysus is like the trickster, the jokester, the artist, the poet, the person who lives in the here and now, not the person who lives in the head. And so Nietzsche was really, in a way, kind of birthed the existential movement among other philosophers in Western philosophy, but also in a way was one of the first postmodern philosophers too. Because even philosophers that have been against metaphysics, they're still trying to do metaphysics to outdo somebody else's metaphysics, even if that involves doing epistemology. That is basically another version of metaphysics. This idea that like epistemology and metaphysics are separate, right, is actually an assumption that may or may not be true. So somebody like David Hume like is doing metaphysics, right? I mean, as much as he would like to say that metaphysics is nonsense, Other philosophers like Kant would acknowledge doing metaphysics, but they want to say that their metaphysics is the one right metaphysic and all the other metaphysics are wrong. You can see, Derrida kind of following in this kind of mindset, that his theory of arche writing is the underlying theory of meaning. Just like Wittgenstein thought that his view of the pragmatic functioning of language is the underlying linguistic foundation for sense making, as feminine as it is. Or Hegel's acknowledgement that history is important, but he's going to give you the dialectic of history, right? Like the ideal intellectual account that sits up over the change. Right? So even in Western philosophy, there's been this interplay. Derrida talks about this word interplay, which is interesting because Nietzsche's word was play. That we focus on the play rather than on the serious, contemplative statement. It's the play of life. And you can see how Heidegger, this is being in the world. I talked about this in my terminology. Heidegger tried to privilege this, but with a metaphysical background. So you can see how Heidegger is trying to, in a way, privilege Nietzsche's perspective, but provide a metaphysic that actually makes it true. Which is not what Nietzsche wanted. I mean, Nietzsche was much more like, he was less of a philosopher than Heidegger. He wanted to prove himself, but not through philosophy. Heidegger was like, no, I think we can defend this philosophically, this being in the world state. In a way, Derrida is very similar to Jung, right? We're going to take all the shadow aspects of meaning and we're going to assume, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a break, I'm going to come back, and then we're going to switch to Derrida because to talk about Derrida, I got to focus on Derrida. So just give me 1 second. All right, friends, welcome back. So let me give you an account of Derrida. So Derrida is like really remarkably misunderstood. And so I've studied Derrida for a long time. I've gotten all kinds of shit from like people who I've known. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. Let me give you a little bit of an introduction to Derrida. So Derrida was very much a creature in Western philosophy. Calling him a creature. I'm a creature too, right? We're all creatures, I guess. I don't even know what a creature is, but a creature. In Western philosophy, when the focus was very much on meaning and language, which was a big part of what we might call contemporary Western philosophy, is people started to think that issues in philosophy can best be reduced to language and meaning. I mean, Nietzsche didn't give a fuck about meaning or language, right? He was just talking about power and the human condition and values, and he was focused on being in the world. He wasn't focused on this kind of academic shit. But, in the last 100 years or so in Western philosophy, I don't know if this comes from mathematics or science or the need for universities to make money or whatever it is, but philosophers became very, very interested in language and in meaning. And going back to the early Wittgenstein, a sentence is true if it pictures the world, right? Just like Spinoza would say, a true idea corresponds to a true extension. So whether you're talking about a word directly corresponding with reality, or you're talking about a thought directly corresponding with reality, or a sentence directly corresponding with reality, or a proposition directly corresponding to reality, whatever it is, you're talking about the correspondence theory of truth. So Nietzsche was one of the first philosophers to blow this apart and say, this is bullshit. This is Apollo, right? Not Dionysus. Apollonian. And it's pedantic. This is like the person you see on a spirituality forum that's like always joking around, has like snake-like energy, it's always pulling the carpet out from underneath things. And they seem to survive doing this. Like the poet, the creative artist, the creator, right? This is like the feminine, but also trying to make a point too. Like they can be viewed as like stirring the pot, kind of a devilish kind of character, right? The rock star, you know, the way that like rock musicians interact with each other, you know, it's like it's always joking around, twisting words around, wit, banter, you know, that kind of thing. Like the asshole, satirical, like, you know, we're all these like asshole, like punk rock people, but we have a relationship, and so we're just joking around, you know, in a way that you would think like people in the military might act too, right? Like we're all these assholes who are in this like group in the military, and we got to try to make it funny, right? Dionysus, the devil, right? The devil. But the devil actually creates bonding too. It's interesting, like the devil creates virtue, it creates order. And so the devil would be yin, or see, Dionysus would be the feminine. It would be the lower, right? It would be yin, and the Apollo, or the higher, right? The snob, the idealist, is the masculine. The masculine is always trying to transcend the body with the mind. And the masculine gives hope that if you look away from reality and look toward the ideal, that there's a benefit that's going to happen toward future versions of your reality. I mean, deconstruct that project there. Is that pure fantasy? Well, maybe, like the masculine would say that's all there is just you're creating your own reality in the moment. Really? Well, why the fuck, if I were, listen to this. I mean, this is the ultimate refutation of that. If I'm creating every aspect of my reality in the moment, I would fire myself. That can't be true. Like intuitively, I'm telling you right now, that thesis that you are creating your reality by imagining it to be is horseshit. That doesn't feel right to me at all. Now, that's just my bias. You may disagree with me, and I'm just saying, like, I'm definitively saying, like, stating my position. I'm not saying you're wrong, but I'm just saying that, like, that doesn't feel right to me at all. Like, all of my signals about what feels right and true, it doesn't feel right and true to me that reality is the way it is because at a deeper level, I decided to create it that way. I mean, that just sounds like it can't be right to me. So, ultimately, the correspondence theory of truth, to say that it's wrong fundamentally, I think is a problem. You can't have self-acceptance without the correspondence theory of truth. On some level, you need to believe that your beliefs about reality are legitimate. This is the masculine. So this is the correspondence theory of truth line accepted. But where I think this becomes a problem is when this is used knowingly or unknowingly and maybe may not be like such a clear distinction between these, to, as a power move, to elevate your perspective over other people's perspective in a way to get people to follow you as a teacher. And this may not be entirely bad. I mean, there's a reason why we like Plato. The reason why we like Aristotle. There's a reason why we like Descartes. All these philosophers, in a way, they made a name for themselves by being a part of sort of like reiterated history. But I think we would all agree that when you play the philosophical game, here's the downside. That's the upside. The upside is like, it's like fame. You know, there's only one Spinoza, there's only one Descartes, there's only one Leibniz, there's only one Kant, there's only one Derrida, there's only one Wittgenstein, there's only one, right, somebody who's out there trying to make a name for themselves in philosophy. But here's the downside, that every philosopher ultimately is seen through as being partial. And this is what Derrida understood. And even Derrida becomes seen through as being partial too. And I'm going to tell you what it is. So the reason why Derrida is partial is because he's a foundationalist too. His theory of meaning, he wields like a sword. Just like Nietzsche's theory of play. He tears down what he doesn't like. And whatever reasons he gives for that, it like doesn't obscure the fact that that's what he's doing. Like he wants to be right, but he's doing it in this kind of like sneaky way. But he causes you to think. That's the thing about it. It's like in a way, Derrida is the intellectual Carl Jung. When Derrida's talking about deconstruction, he's not talking about destroying. He's just talking about moving into something and trying to see the limitations of it. So Derrida would suggest that when you're thinking that a word, a statement, or a sentence refers to something in the world, that reference assumes a presence, and it also assumes a direct reference. But presence and reference are actually not entirely clear because they're language. And language involves what it is assuming that is not present. So language involves the shadow of all the other language that needs to be there to make that language make sense. So when you talk about God, you talk about truth, you talk about love, you talk about right, or the good, or the beautiful. What you're doing is you're taking a word and you're assuming that word has a single stable meaning. But Derrida would say the very nature of meaning itself is relational. And it's only through relation can we even have a sense of a stable meaning. So that in a way you can see how the later Wittgenstein is also like this too, but a little bit more masculine in his own way. That if you want to understand what language means, you have to look at the context in which the words are used. Now the problem with this can get very Kantian, where it's like now you're telling people what they can or can't do or say regarding truth, God, meaning, and so on. This is where it runs wrong. Because there's only one thing in the world that can make that determination, and that's you sitting with your own judgment. And so I think from my perspective, it's the correspondence theory of truth line accepted and the correspondence theory of truth line rejected. It's both of those. It's not one or the other. To assume there's one or the other, I think, is an oversimplification. It's like trying to take yin and saying yin exists and yang is no-go. Or saying, no, wait a minute, no, yang exists and yin is no-go. No, like, these are patterns that are here that we can talk about. But one in a way, we can see how the mistakes of privileging an isolated moment and thing over flux, fluidity, and context, but then the reverse of that too as being a problem. And then so ultimately it's like judgment has to be something that's more than philosophy. But then how do we account for this without assuming philosophy? Well, that's where you move into the mystical and realizing that guidance may or may not come from you alone, right? I mean, guidance from who or where? Okay, friends. I mean, this is all subject for another video, for a future video. But hopefully, in this video, I gave you some ideas about why, in philosophy, philosophers have rebutted this idea that there's a correspondence between language or ideas and extension, and said, no, actually, the presuppositions about language and ideas are such that there is no direct link between say so and is in the world. That holding on to that in a way is a kind of error, a kind of myopic, overly masculine, overly kind of like you're in your own little bubble, you're in your own little world. You don't realize the extent to which that's an ox. Like you saw the tail of the ox, and you think that is enlightenment. You've mistaken the tail of the ox for the whole thing, right? So the feminine is always there to humble the masculine in this way, but they're married, and at a higher level, you can learn how to keep them married in a way where you don't. It's not a battle. I mean, in a marriage, married people don't battle. I mean, they do in the human, but like in the divine or post-divine, they don't battle. The reason why they're married is because they're here. It's a paradox that's here. See, but maybe not. See, I wanna tear apart my own what I'm saying here. I want to cross it out almost, and just say, this is. If I didn't say that, this video would not be what it should be, which is that the exact problem is this underlying idea that somebody has the right say-so about reality. Okay, friends? Hopefully this was a good video. I'll talk to you soon. Take care.